Is it a playoff eliminator when the Broncos come to town on Sunday for the Texans and that offensive line is shuffling again? Welcome into the channel. I'm Cody Stoots. Let's talk some Texans, and let's talk Texans with a very special guest joining me to talk about many things about this Texans team today. You hear him on Sports Radio 610. You read him on Cron.com. He is one of the best dudes around, and he does really good work as well. It's Brandon Scott. Brandon, thanks for jumping on the channel with me.
If I can unmute myself. Cody, thanks for having me, man. It's an honor to be here. I really respect and enjoy the work that you've been doing over these last several months since you went out on your own. A lot of respect for it. And really just beyond that, just really good content, man. So it's a good resource, not only for myself, but obviously for the folks that are paying attention, watching and listening. So keep doing your thing, man. Thanks for having me.
Man, you're kind to say that. You're kind to say that. Brandon and I actually met way back in the day. It was, 2014? Back when you were in Conroe covering the courts up in Montgomery County. I was up there covering Adrian Peterson just like you were. We met back then, and then we've all been a bunch of different places all since then, and now we both cover the Texans a ton. So it's great to have you on and chop it up. It's cool to see how it's all kind of worked for us too.
Yeah, 100%, man. That was a completely different time, almost a decade ago. And our worlds just kind of ended up colliding there. You were doing like the reporter role over at 610. And I'd already, known who you were from listening to the station. So I was already actually somewhat, at least on a minimal level, familiar with you. And then we met and have known each other ever since. But, it's funny because even back then I was trying to get to where we are right now, where we find ourselves right here, right now. So you talk about full circle and just putting in the work, doing whatever you have to do. If I can go on a quick tangent for media, if you're someone who is aspiring in media, the lesson learned from what Cody just talked about and what we're talking about here is don't say no to any job if you can help it, and that was what led me to being in the Montgomery County courts, because I would not say no to a job, and the willingness to continue to work and to keep working ultimately got me to where I was trying to go.
Yeah, that's great advice from Brandon, and you got to follow all his work that he does now. No more court stuff, a lot more football stuff, and a lot of football stuff about this Texans team that is right there in the thick of things when it comes to the playoffs. They did a video the other day, and I felt like the expectation still for this team going forward is to make the playoffs. Do you feel the same way, Brandon, that the expectation is still for the Texans to be a playoff team after what they've accomplished so far?
Yeah, I think it has to be, Cody, and we have to talk about it differently from the way we did before. Like, if you're going to want to apply previous standards and previous expectations to now, then obviously, you could say they're dealing with house money here. Like, they're already better than almost anybody expected them to be. So you could say that, doubling up your win total or just winning 6 games so far is already a success. And I would agree with that. I would agree with the premise, Cody, that even if they lose out, obviously that's going to be disappointing.
Right.
But let's say they win, let's call it 9 games, and for whatever reason they're on the outside looking into the playoff race. I think you'd have to look at that as a success. I think you have to look at what they've done so far as a success, like unequivocally. But with that success comes expectations. It comes, you have to ask the next logical question. That's what we do in our business, right? When we're at what is the next logical question to ask? And the next logical question after you beat the Cincinnati Bengals before they lose Joe Burrow, after you go out there and you outduel Baker Mayfield when he's playing like the Baker Mayfield that they always want, that Cleveland wanted him to be, and that Tampa was hoping that they would get. And when you go out there and, even respond to the loss against the Panthers by doing what they did against Tampa Bay. And when you show that they beat the Jaguars earlier in the season, like they've shown enough glimpses, enough positive things this year to make you say, okay, I have to look at this team differently than I did in the beginning. I have to view them differently, and I have to expect of them more than I expected of them when they were just some new team with a first-year head coach and a rookie quarterback that we didn't know anything about. We know enough about them now to say that the expectation is this and that.
Yeah, so we're definitely on the same page here. Certainly, you're happy that they've done what they've accomplished, but because they've accomplished it the way they've accomplished it, you have higher expectations for them. So if we're talking playoffs, it leads me into my first thing that I want to talk about with you. Is this kind of a playoff eliminator versus the Denver Broncos as they come to town on Sunday? It's a Broncos team that, surprisingly, after the rough stretch to start their season, they're right in the thick of things in the AFC, just like you are. They're nipping at your heels in the AFC playoff standings. And as we know, a head-to-head matchup with a team is super important. This feel like a playoff eliminator to you? Not that necessarily you're done if you lose. That's kind of, I guess, what eliminator is. But that path to the playoffs for either of these teams becomes extremely difficult if they don't win on Sunday.
Yeah, it's not a playoff eliminator because that's a mathematical thing.
Sure.
And they wouldn't be mathematically eliminated. But, man, it does feel like a dream killer if they lose, right? You want to talk about buzz and momentum and all of those positive things that I was just talking about. You want to talk about, like, really nipping a bud in that. That's how you do it. Lose this game to Denver, which is a formidable opponent. Like, I don't want to make it seem like, this is not the Panthers game when I was like, man, they just can't lose this game. Ain't no way they can lose this game. And then they go out there and, of course, lose the game. Yeah, no, they could lose this game. They could lose this game reasonably. They could, like, the Broncos are good enough to just flat out beat them the way the Jaguars did. It's also within the realm of possibility that they could beat themselves, which we've seen them do at times. True. Like all of that is in play, I think. But in terms of being a playoff eliminator, I don't think so from the standpoint of the Jaguars. And I was just having this conversation in the elevator right before we came on to talk about this. But they obviously make it hard or harder on themselves. The further you get into the season, the more the games matter, the more weight is on each and every game. But they're 2 games behind Jacksonville. They obviously need a lot of help to win the division if they were still going to do that. But I don't think that help is out of play. Like, if they lose this game, I'll tell you how I'll be looking at it. What else is going on? What is everybody else doing? What's Jacksonville doing with its remaining schedule? They've got the Browns and the Ravens back-to-back after this week. Of course, they play the Bengals, which it's a game that looks a lot differently than the way we might consider it if Joe Burrow was playing. But, and if he was playing, that would be Bengals, Browns, Ravens back-to-back. And then they got the Bucks after that, if I'm not mistaken, the Tampa Bay Bucks after that, which is not a great team, but as we've seen, a team that's pretty scrappy. So I'm not prepared to just say based on losing to Denver alone that it's a playoff eliminator. It obviously makes things harder, but they're in the thick of it. They're in, and not just like in the hunt as they show on the graphics, but like they're in a mucked up part of the AFC, right? Yeah. Like you've got your teams that are at the top and you know who they are, and credit to Jacksonville. They got to maintain their status as one of those teams. But behind them, with the Steelers, the Browns, the Broncos themselves, the Bills, like you've got all of these teams that could muck it up for you or for themselves. And so I would not look at this game as an eliminator, but obviously it makes it a lot harder. But it of course, the thing that it does is make you scoreboard watch a lot more than you would have had you, say, won that game against Jacksonville. And obviously, if you took care of business against Denver.
Yeah, that's the scoreboard watching is a great point, because if you're taking care of your business as the Texans and you look at what the Texans have left on their schedule, if they beat those teams, you're going to end up with a tiebreaker over the Denver Broncos. You'll end up with a tiebreaker over the Cleveland Browns. You will likely end up with the tiebreaker over the Indianapolis Colts. You already own it over the Pittsburgh Steelers. And like all those teams I just mentioned are all the teams that are right there in front of you and around you in the playoff race. And to your point, talking about what everybody else does, I mean, if the Texans can have a stinker against the Carolina Panthers earlier this year, all these teams are capable of having a week 16, 17 stinker against some team that doesn't have anything left to play for. There's some interim coach or something trying to coach his tail off and keep the job. You never know exactly what's going to happen. But, yeah, a loss to Denver doesn't mathematically eliminate you. As you pointed out, it makes it pretty tough, and it makes you pay attention to who's helping you a whole heck of a lot more. I certainly agree with that. All right, B. Scott, have you ever seen a football team have so many offensive line injuries like this team has?
Dude.
Have you ever seen anything like this? Can I just go through real quick?
Please do, because I was about to pull up your tweet. I bookmarked your tweet from earlier because it spelled it out really well. And I knew all of this that you put out here, but I had not laid it, like put pen to paper and laid it out visually the way that you did earlier. So go ahead and go through it.
Yeah. So during the regular season, you know what? Let's go ahead and just do the old share screen here.
Yeah, the people need to see this, Cody. Yeah.
In the regular season, okay, just the regular season, Laramie Tunsil, Josh Jones, Austin Deculus, and Jaron Christian have played left tackle. Two of those guys aren't even on the team anymore. At left guard, Josh Jones, Michael Dieter, Kendrick Green, Titus Howard, now Juice Scruggs. At center, Jarrett Patterson, Michael Dieter. At right guard, Shaq Mason, who's the Iron Man. He's basically the only guy that doesn't get hurt, knock on wood. And then at right tackle, Michael Dieter for one play, which was a fumble sack, and Josh Jones. And George Fant missed practice on Wednesday. And so if he can't go, then Charlie Heck will be the fourth different right tackle. And this is banana land that we are talking about so many injuries.
Yeah. And then the left guard thing, I just want to point to, because you got the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 names on there, right?
Yeah.
So 5 guys have played left guard for the Texans this year. And it especially with Titus going on, being out for the year and all of that with the news of the day, it reminds me that all of those guys are playing in that spot to begin with, because the guy that they drafted to play that position at 15th overall just last year, he got hurt.
Yep.
So there's a name that's not even on here because it doesn't belong on here because he hasn't played, but he is the reason for the long list of names that you have there on left guard. He is the impetus for it.
Yeah.
So it is wild to me to think of how much shuffling they had to do along the offensive line, especially given how much they've invested in it. And I'm not just talking about money. I'm talking about money primarily because Laramie Tunsil's on this list. Titus Howard, obviously, is the news of the day. Shaq Mason, thank God, the Iron Man at the very least. Say what you want about Shaq Mason. At the very least, he has been the Iron Man. I know there's some question marks of why did he get that contract upon being traded, if that was necessary and all of that. But he has at least been the Iron Man. But think about all the money that's invested in those guys. They've invested more in the offensive line than any other team. And then that's not even to mention Kenyon Green, who has not played this year and did not play well as a rookie. And then Juice Scruggs, who was promising when he got in there for Titus in this previous game, this most recent game, but he missed 10 games. He missed 10 games with the hamstring injury. And that's a second round pick. So first round pick, second round pick, you're now going into a game, into your the 12th game now?
Yeah, 12th game.
Into your 12th game now. And you got a first round pick and a second round pick who have played one game. And then you got all these other guys that you've had to shuffle around that you paid, and only one of them has been actually fully healthy. It is a cluster bleep.
And only 2, you mentioned it, 5 guys left guard. Only 2 of the 5 guys were even brought into the building or a part of the team to play left guard. Like Kendrick Green was here to help you at left guard. Michael Dieter's here to help you at left guard. Josh Jones was brought in as a tackle backup.
Yeah.
Titus Howard's the 3rd, 4th highest paid right tackle in football. And Juice Scruggs was drafted to be your starting center. It's like we talk about, Kenyon Green got hurt in the preseason. You lost Kendrick Green for the season. And then, Scott Quessenberry was maybe going to be the starting center for this team. Or at the very least, that's a veteran that's in the building and in the room who's played certainly more football than Jarrett Patterson or Juice Scruggs had heading into this year.
He was their returning starter. He was their returning starter. He had to step up for Justin Britt after that, whatever happened there. So, he was literally, I know that they drafted and addressed the position, but he was quite literally their returning starting center.
Yeah, it's been, and through all this, the last game maybe notwithstanding, but through all this, they've been pretty good on the offensive line. Like they've had moments of excellence. They had that stretch where they didn't give up any sacks. They've had the two really impressive rushing performances against the Cardinals and against the Bengals. And it's like, okay, this game against the Jaguars, like Jacksonville was breathing down their neck on the rushing play, so they stopped running the football, and then it felt like CJ was under pressure every time, but he's kind of making things happen. Like all these injuries, and they're still kind of making things work and happen with this offense and even with the offensive line from time to time.
Yeah, it is a credit, I think, to the players first and foremost, but I think the coaching and all of that. But it is still, like, for me, it is still like a major concern, and then at the same time a major accomplishment, because I know CJ Stroud was under duress earlier on in the year, and then they had that stretch where they weren't giving up a sack, and then this last game kind of is more of an anomaly in that way. But they've had all of these issues along the offensive line and have been able to keep their quarterback upright for the most part, keep him healthy at the very least. He pops up on the injury report this week for the first time in maybe all year, but certainly in a long time. I feel like he might have been on there once earlier in the year.
He showed up with the random shoulder thing.
That's right. I forgot about the shoulder. That's right.
It was before the Colts game.
Yeah. Because we were wondering if they were going to like lessen this load at practice and all of that comes with that. But so, yeah, for the most part, an offensive line that is in flux has been able to keep upright a rookie quarterback that has played better than I think anybody gave him credit for being able to play, especially as a rookie. So it's really impressive, but at the same time concerning as well, because you're like, okay, how sustainable is that? They got a handful of games left to play. And then, as we talked about earlier, playoffs are a part of the aspiration, a part of what should be a realistic expectation on their part. So how does that look? Now, I do think that the way it's going to be shuffled this time is actually going to be beneficial to them.
Yes.
Because Juice Scruggs, while he's a center, he's just an actual interior offensive lineman.
Correct.
He plays with a level of, I think, edginess and nastiness that is required, especially on the interior. And so I think they're going to benefit from that. And, of course, George Fant, that to me is the big part. How, like, because George Fant's popped up on the injury report before. He's had some days off before, and then ultimately he's gone out there and played. What does that look like? We'll monitor that throughout the week. But if he can go, and with the level of play that he's giving you, he's kind of an underrated story, I think. One of their big bargains for me, like really big time. If he's able to go, then this offensive line, I like what kind of shape it's in going into this Denver game.
Fant's probably one of the best bargain signings in the entirety of the NFL this year. And he's really setting himself up. Like, he's not going to be on this team next year. Like, they have to play Titus Howard at right tackle.
Yeah.
It's like George Fant's probably setting himself up for a nice little payday. Somebody's going to go pay him money to go hold down their right side, especially if a guy like Fant, who previously had injury concerns, which is part of the reason he's available a week into training camp for a couple $1 million. If he stays healthy over the course of an entire year or most of the year, some team will pay him in free agency, and then you put Titus Howard at right tackle. I don't know how you feel about this. There's a chance that this offensive line configuration on Sunday is better than the one that they went into the game with last Sunday. And I believe that's the reason for that is what you talked about. Scruggs is a real interior offensive lineman. For everything that I appreciate Titus Howard doing what the team asked him to do, and they paid him, they took care of him. He's one of the highest paid right tackles in football. He's just not as good at left guard as traditional left guards are. Like he hasn't been as good. He's not as productive there as he is at right tackle. And I get that they felt like that was their best five. With Scruggs' availability now and him coming in, like the injury, it stinks because you paid him the money, you wanted the investment. But if there's a chance Scruggs is a better left guard than Titus Howard is than Titus Howard is at left guard. Yeah,
I would be willing to bet on it even. And I'm not really much of a betting man, but it does make me think of just the situation that they were in. And I'm not making excuses because I've never been a big fan of the Titus Howard at left guard experiment. He's a tackle. You and I even have agreed in the past that they should have even explored making him their left tackle of the future before they gave all of the money to Laramie Tunsil even the first time. Yeah. So I think you and I are both on record in agreement on Titus Howard, the tackle, really on either side, but on this team, let's just stick specifically to the right tackle. Like that is where he's good. That is where he should play. I'm with you. I think that there's a good chance that now that you got guys playing more true to their position, that it's going to be a better configuration. It is interesting, though, Cody, to think about how it all played out. Like the Texans found themselves with a void on the interior because of all of the injuries. But the way that they planned it out in the beginning of the year, because of Titus's injury, and of course, Laramie's been dealing with a lingering knee thing, the way that they built the team, they ended up with a surplus of tackles.
Yeah.
Like obviously Laramie and Titus are on the team, they're paid. But then they bring in George Fant and Josh Jones. Charlie Heck's already on the team, but he's injured. And so now he's back. And so you look at it and you're like, man, we need interior offensive linemen, but we got all these damn tackles.
Yeah.
Okay. So which one of these tackles can go play where we actually need somebody to play? And it sounds like Titus Howard was the only one that was a candidate for that, or was the main one that fit that bill. But it does make me think, like, okay, what if Juice Scruggs is able to come back earlier? And so he's able to play center, or like, how would it have gone if they had both Juice Scruggs and Michael Dieter available to them to play, to figure out the center guard situation? Would they have still played? The question is, would they have still played Titus Howard at guard over Michael Dieter or Juice Scruggs, whichever one was able to play there? And I think the answer is yes, because it seems like, it just seems like the answer is yes. That they thought, they waited until until they absolutely needed Jared Patterson, or until Jared Patterson got hurt, and they absolutely needed Michael Dieter to play center to put him out there. But it's just it is interesting that they thought a guy playing out of position was a better option than a guy playing in position. Mm-hmm. And would they have thought the same thing if Juice Scruggs was available to them the entire time? That I do not know the answer to, and not sure if I ever will. But the surplus of tackles reared its head in Titus Howard being the only one that they felt was versatile enough to kick inside.
If Juice Scruggs is healthy week 5 for Atlanta, when he and Titus Howard could have both come off the injured reserve at the same time, I do believe there's a pretty good chance George Fant gets shown the bench. Not and it's just like, hey, we've got stuff invested in these guys. We're going to put Titus out there. Juice was really good a couple of weeks ago for us, because at that point it'd been a little over a month, because you have that week after the third preseason game. It'd been a little over a month that he hadn't played football, but like once it got to 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks that he hadn't played football, they clearly didn't want to just throw him in there. Now, maybe if he's healthy when Patterson goes down, maybe he's the guy instead of Dieter. Well, he wasn't. He wasn't healthy. He wasn't on the roster. Like, he was still hurt. So, I mean, it's kind of what you said with the surplus of tackles. They could have used somebody to take a little break here for a week or two on the tackle thing, just to see what they would have done with. Like, I cannot believe if Laramie had to miss a game in the past 3 weeks. I can't believe they'd have put Josh Jones at left tackle over Fant or Titus Howard. So it's like I understand why Titus Howard played left guard. You spent $1 gazillion on him. He's got to play. You can't just bench him because he might not be good. And he played okay from time to time, more often than, I would say below average than average. But it's a very weird offensive line. It's going to be a weird offseason because they're kind of set. Like, they're set at 3 spots: right tackle, right guard, and left tackle. Like, those guys are paid. And then you have a first-round pick in Kenyon Green, maybe coming back for left guard. You have a second-round pick in Juice Scruggs, fighting for a center spot. Jared Patterson was really good. So now you've got those guys, plus Kendrick Green still on the team. And then whatever else you do from like a addition, subtraction standpoint with free agency money, like, you're kind of set. You're not changing a lot of stuff. And I'll stop everybody. Don't get in the comment section. They can't trade Laramie Tunsil. They can't trade Titus Howard. And they can't trade Shaq Mason. Those guys make too much money. So they can't trade them. So those guys are here next year. And it's like, who's the center? Who's the left guard?
So I'm trying to work through this question, Cody. Help me out here. Outside of the injuries, and it's hard to talk like that because the injuries have been so prevalent with the offensive line. But if I just think about them, a straight up healthy offensive line, all the names that you just listed and all the scenarios that you just listed, is it weird to kind of like the offensive line situation? Like I don't like it now because they're hurt and they're doing weird things where they've got a surplus of tackles and one of them has to play guard and all of that. And of course, now he's hurt as well, Titus Howard, that being. But when you tell me that now, especially after what we saw from Jared Patterson, so he comes back healthy. So now we feel like we got a better sense for what Jared Patterson is, and we're getting a better sense for what Juice Scruggs is. Much smaller sample size, obviously, just, not even a full game. We're going to see how that all plays out for the rest of the year. But assuming you feel good about those two things, I feel, for the Texans at least, better about their offensive line situation because Kenyon Green now at that point becomes like, bonus. I'm not saying, he's a bonus. Like if he can actually play, if he can give you something, then great. You've got some depth between whoever doesn't play center, between Patterson and Juice Scruggs. And then you got Kendrick Green coming back as well. So, like, you've got now depth at center and guard if either Kendrick Green can't go or isn't any good or whatever the case may be. Like, I feel like you've got more answers, better answers to your center left guard questions going into next year, certainly than you had going into this year, but even right now.
It will be fascinating to watch next year in training camp and see if this is actually a meritocracy. Because if Juice Scruggs puts together a good stretch here to finish the season and Patterson's back healthy, that's two segments of football that's better than anything Kenyon Green's done in the NFL. So in theory, those guys should start the season ahead of Kenyon Green with those opportunities. And so if it's truly a meritocracy and the best guys play, then Kenyon Green will come to training camp trying to beat either Juice Scruggs or Jared Patterson out for the left guard spot. Or he's a very expensive backup, but with the injuries, maybe you keep him around. I don't know. But to your point, I do believe there's a chance that when September 2024 rolls around, we think to ourselves and look at each other and say, they kind of got it going on this offensive line.
Yes.
The funny part about that is it's going to be about, hopefully, a healthy Laramie Tunsil at left tackle, because he's clearly not healthy right now. He's not playing very well. A healthy Titus Howard at right tackle, which is his real position. And then two young guys that one's performed well, not going to play again this year in Patterson, and the other one we hope performs well in Juice Scruggs. Like September 2024, I can already tell you at Houston football, I'm going to write about how this offensive line is ready to go. Like I know I'm going to write about that. Now, of course, if the injury gods strike again and they lose three guys in training camp like they did this year, then maybe we'll have a different story.
Yeah, man, you more power to you for doing that if you end up doing it, because I'm going to feel jaded. I'm going to feel jaded and remember when we got Shaq Mason in the room for the first time and he told us that he thought the offensive line could be a strength of the team. Mm-hmm. And again, let's give them credit for how they've been able to figure things out in the midst of calamity. But I would not call it, just by default, because of how everybody's been dropping like flies, I would not call it exactly a strength of the team. So I'm going to remember that. I'm going to remember that going into next year.
It has most of the time avoided being a weakness, but it has failed to find itself as a strength.
That is a fair way to put it.
I think that's a comfortable spot to put it in. All right, B. Scott, you've given me a ton of time. I want to get one last thing in here. What's the best way for this offense to operate? It's kind of a loaded question. You can kind of take it any sort of way. To me, I think it's simple to say. It's not easy to execute. It's that in rhythm stuff that we've seen CJ Stroud succeed with so often, combined with a little sprinkle of his improvisation. Because what they did this past Sunday against the Jaguars they can't do that every week. Like they'll get CJ hurt, or you lose something with the wide receivers. Like there were a couple times where Nico's over on the sidelines. He got the hands on the hips. He's like these plays aren't supposed to go 40 seconds. Like plays are supposed to be like 18 seconds, and then you get a 35-second break before the next snap. Like, and these guys are running around for like 40 seconds. That's not supposed to happen. It's like, I think, to me, like, almost in rhythm, in system is kind of the best way for this thing to go. What say you?
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's funny though how people internalize or what the takeaways are from a game like that, because I've seen now a ton of arguments of CJ Stroud not playing a good game because of all of the scrambling that he did, because he held on to the ball maybe a little bit too long at times, because he was maybe a little greedy at times in taking shots when maybe he should have been taking some of the easy money that was right there in front of him. And I think those are all valid criticisms, especially for people who break down the tape a little bit closer than I do. But I would also say that it was impressive to me that he was able to, and I'm going to answer the question in a second, but I want to just say that it was impressive to me that CJ Stroud was able to make the most out of little, or was able to make more out of less, is the way it felt watching that game, as opposed to with Trevor Lawrence. He had his guys getting open. His guys were getting open at a better rate than CJ Stroud's were getting open. His offensive line was protected. Now, he was getting rid of the ball really fast, so it's not like they had a whole lot to protect to begin with. But I thought that everything around Trevor Lawrence was better on Sunday in this past game against the Jaguars. His defense, his weapons, his offensive line was all better than the counterparts, than CJ Stroud's defense, weapons, and offensive line. And even within that, CJ Stroud was still able to show you some special qualities and some things that, really only the elite quarterbacks can do to keep you in the games. And that is extending the plays, and that is giving you a chance to make a play even when it doesn't seem like a play is there. And so from that standpoint, I came away from the game impressed by CJ, even if you could say that it wasn't a classical good game for a quarterback because of some of those things that we mentioned. So that was the way that I took it in, even if I'll acknowledge that the criticisms of CJ from the game are valid. I'm just watching, especially from just a football observer and fan experience, I should say an entertainment value standpoint. I'm like, yo, that dude out there is balling. Like, not everything out there is making a lot of sense. And I don't know why he's doing that, but damn, did you see him do that? Did you see him throw, it was one of those games for me. But the answer to this question, though, for me, what's the best way for this offense to operate? And I don't want to be cliche. I don't want to be like just cliche football points and we wrap it up and go home. But I truly believe this. So that's why I kind of preface it with that. I do think that they have to have a running game. I think that they absolutely need to be able to run the ball. And that was what was really disappointing about the game. Just not just the fact that they weren't necessarily effective running the game.
They quit on it.
Running the ball, but they quit on it. They didn't even really give it that much of a shot. And I thought especially having a committee, like it's odd to me. And I'd really love to hear Bobby Slug's explanation for this, but it is odd to me that in the weeks that Dameon Pierce is not available, and you really have one bell cow in quotation marks in Devin Singletary, that he can get up to 30 carries in a situation like that. But in a week where you do have a committee, where you do have both of your top running backs available, that between the two of them, they would just get the ball 11 times. Like, between the two of them, they get the ball a third the amount of when you just had the one. That part does not make sense to me. So that to me, what's the best way for this offense to operate? Let CJ Stroud cook, but give him some doggone help with a semblance of a running game. And I know we were complaining a lot in the beginning of the year that sometimes they were running too much, or they were running in odd situations, or maybe sometimes they were too predictable on their situational running. I know that was a criticism, but yo, man, 11 times for two backs like that, to me, that just, and I don't care how good the run defense is. You've got to at least try a little bit better than that. And honestly, and I asked Nico Ryans about this earlier in the week, like, what is the challenge to the offensive line in a situation like this where Like, y'all need to run the ball. Like, y'all need to do better than this. Y'all need to give the quarterback some semblance of support, and y'all need to keep the ball out of the hands of the quarterback that's on the other side who's really good. Every game that they play doesn't necessarily feel like that. I know they made Desmond Ridder look really good in Atlanta, but you're going to play some Desmond Ridders sometimes, the performance against him notwithstanding. You're going to play guys like that where you're like, we don't necessarily have to keep the ball out of his hands. Trevor Lawrence is somebody who I feel like you should, want to keep the ball out of his hands. You need a running game. It's going to be the same way, I think, with even Russell Wilson, who's playing a lot better. Like the really good quarterbacks, I would say from average to above average quarterbacks, I want the ball in their hands as least as possible. Yeah. So to me, in a game like that, where the opposing quarterback is Trevor Lawrence, the opposing offense is one that can put up points like we saw the Jaguars could. You need a run game of some sort. Like, you need to force the physicality of the other team, make them tackle, make them make plays in that kind of way. And they just did not do that. I think it's not a coincidence that in the games where they had a really good running game, they also, like, the offense just really was wide open. Noah Brown was able to have, it was easy. Noah Brown was able to have big days. Tank Dell was able to have big days. Obviously, CJ Stroud is the quarterback. Like, it just makes everything run a lot more smoothly.
And they block better because you beat up the defensive line. You beat those guys up, and they block a little bit better, and you don't have to keep Dalton Schultz and Andrew Beck in. Get Schultz out there running routes. I know he's banged up. He's on the injury report. They desperately need him. They don't have any tight end presence if they don't have Dalton Schultz. I know Brevin Jordan's back from his ankle injury, and they got the other guy, Saubert.
Siebert.
He played at Drake. Not the rapper. That's the name of the university he played at.
Did he come from the Cowboys? Where'd they get him? Where was he?
I think he was on his couch somewhere. I don't know where he's previously been, but I don't recall him being somewhere earlier this year. But I could be remiss in that. But I think just one more thing about the rushing attack. The game was never Jacksonville destroying you so you couldn't run the football either. Like, that was a frustrating part about it too. Like, the Indianapolis game happens, you're down 14-0 to begin the game. Like, okay, I understand why you're maybe not going to run the football as much, but the Jaguars only ever got up by 10. Like they were never blowing you out where you couldn't run the football. And again, I think this is I don't want to harp on it too much, but like, if you can run the football, if drives all of a sudden last 8 plays instead of 4 plays, if they last 10 plays instead of 6 plays, that defense gets a little bit of a breather, and guys who are, in the spin cycle, like Tavier Thomas and, Steven Nelson and the defensive linemen, they get just like a little bit more oxygen in the lungs, and maybe that helps you a little bit from a defensive perspective.
I want Bobby Slowick to find the balance between 11 total runs for his running backs in one game, which included, by the way, not running the ball on a back-to-back third down and fourth down situation where
3rd and 1, 4th and 1.
Yeah, and especially if you're going for it on 4th down, then you should obviously at the very least run it on 3rd down. If it's a 4-down situation for you, I don't know why in any scenario you're not at least trying to run it on 3rd down to give yourself that extra chance, like to take advantage of the fact that it's 4-down territory or 4-down situation. Find the balance between that and 4th and short Mike Boone pitch to the outside, like outside the numbers, when Devin Singletary has been killing it in between the tackles for the entire drive, like they did the previous game. So the rhyme or reason, Bobby Slowick, I think, has done a lot of really good things, and he's going to get a lot of attention, I think, in the offseason for, I think, possibly his first head coaching interviews. If not, I don't think he's going to necessarily get a job per se, but it's not out of the realm of possibility, and he'll certainly get interviews. And so he's done a good job. But his rhyme or reason, I don't know if he's underthinking or overthinking. I would have to assume that he's overthinking because he's a really smart guy, but he is not thinking properly on some of this run allocation. Like, I need the balance between Mike Boone outside the tackle on 4th down and we're not going to run it at all in an obvious 4-down situation, right, and we're just going to chuck it. Like, find the balance in between those and report back to me.
B. Scott, where can the folks find all of your work? It's all over the place. By the way, you don't talk just Texans. You're very good at talking Texans, but you cover the Rockets. You cover the Astros as well. I mean, I think I've seen you painted up at a Dynamo game before. I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah, it's funny that so I've been doing some interviews now. I'm doing a couple of interviews with the Dynamo head coach, Ben Olsen, and trying to develop a little relationship there. I like what the Dynamo are doing. Just as a side note, I wish that the timing wasn't what it is, because there is no possible way that we can give them the attention that they probably deserve and that they are warranted for what they're doing out there in the MLS playoffs, because it's football season and it's not the 2021 and 2022 football season that we've been dealing with. It's an actual relevant NFL team, and we have to give it its proper due. The Rockets are surprisingly better, and I do say surprisingly because I thought they would be marginally better, but not a lot better. They are a better basketball team. So, like, I'm trying to keep my hands and my attention to all of that, my hands in basically everything, and keep my attention paid to all of that. And it is exhausting, but you can find most of it on sportsradio610.com. On social media, though, I would say at Brandon K. Scott, you can see what I'm doing either, whether it's at 610, whether it's cron.com, whether it's my now super random baseball articles that I write for Bleacher Report. You can catch those out. I'm actually about to go work on one as soon as we finish. And then, of course, the H-Town Hoops podcast with Adam Spillane. It is I think, an underrated podcast, Rockets podcast, because it's got a couple of geriatric millennials doing it now. And, the Rockets fan base is very much not geriatric millennial. It is whatever the generation is after us. And so it's a lot of them, but I think that we do a really good job, and I'm proud of the work that we do over there. So the H-Town Hoops podcast, wherever you get your podcast, if you are also interested in what's going on with the Rockets. So a lot of ways to find me.
All right. That article is Ohtani to the Astros, right? Is that what you're writing?
Man, Ohtani. I wish. I wish, and I wish I could also say that I'm above headline clickbait, But if I can find a way to squeeze in Ohtani Astros in a headline, but still make the actual writing itself accurate and maybe mislead you just enough to come read it, I'm not above that. Hey,
clickbait is giving people nothing what the title says. That's never what you do.
Yeah,
I think our good friend Landry Locker calls it headline porn.
Headline porn, yeah.
Headline porn, that'll get you sometimes. I like to just say that you got to create headlines that tantalize.
Yes.
Headlines that tantalize.
I'm with that. I'm with the tantalizing headline, but if I'm honest about it, man, it's wild. Like, I wish, for as successful as the Astros have been, I wish that we were covering a baseball team that was in the mix, in the Ohtani conversation. Like, I follow a lot of Chicago sports media because I just think they do a good job up there at that market. And they feel like the Cubs are in the Ohtani sweepstakes, right? Wow. If you're in LA, obviously the Dodgers are in the Ohtani sweepstakes. I would imagine that, Yankees fans, the New York market thinks they're in the sweepstakes for everything that's good. So I imagine they feel that way. As someone who covers the Astros, but also wants good things to happen for the Astros, it sucks to not even feel like they are in the mix, like to not even entertain it. Because I'd love to write these headlines. I'd love to write these articles. But I think about it, and we've been covering this team for a while now. You're like, okay, the team that would not ante up and pay George Springer or Carlos Correa obviously didn't pay Garrett Cole. The rumor right now is that they could have Alex Bregman on the trade block. Like, that's not the team that feels like it's about to spend $500 million on Ohtani. Hate to say it. Damn it.
I'll have to wait for the video games to put Ohtani on the Astros.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
B. Scott, man, thank you so much. It's long overdue to get you on here. You were impressive as all heck in the conversation. Some really good stuff. Hope the folks find you on social media. We'll put the link in the description down below so you can find B. Scott. Brandon, thank you so much, man. We'll do this again soon.
For sure, man. Thank you for having me.
Great stuff from our guy, Brandon Scott. I'm telling you, check out the work that B. Scott does. He does a fantastic job covering everything, as he just mentioned. Really good job on the Texans, and great human being. B. Scott is one of the best people in the business. I love chatting with him about life, mostly about sports. Fantastic stuff. You know what else I love doing? I love playing Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Fantasy is the best way to play fantasy. The Pick'em format is unmatched when it comes to playing fantasy. It is incredible, and it is easy. And for watching this podcast, if it's your first time depositing, you're going to get 2 times your first deposit. That's right, up to $100, 2 times your first deposit. Put 50 in, get 100. Put 20 in, get 40. You put $10 in like my buddy Matt did, and my buddy Matt's won, I think, 5 or 6 times. He's well in to triple figures with his Underdog Fantasy winnings. They've got the Scorchers now, which you can up to 100 times your money with the Scorcher picks as well. It's very simple. It's stat prediction. Higher or lower on predicted stats. You put 5 together, you 20 times your money. I tweet out my lineups on Underdog Fantasies, pick them, and 2 weeks ago, I hit a 20-1 for $200. A week before that, I hit 20-1 for $200. So you can hit that too, and you can get 2 times your first deposit with my promo code Stoots. It's right there, Stoots, S-T-O-O-T-S. The link in the description down below will take you to Underdog Fantasy. It should auto-fill that code. If not, then Stoots, S-T-O-O-T-S, for your first-time depositors to double that first deposit up to $100. Check out Underdog Fantasy. They support the channel, and I appreciate their support. And I appreciate you watching the video today. Throw me a thumbs up on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you've watched all the way to the end, man, I hope you have enjoyed this episode. I sure love talking Texans, and I can't wait till we talk Texans again soon.